Okay, I'm Tom Bryan. I had an awful short biography, but I am from Columbus. And this afternoon we'll be looking at some of the Henry J. Hudson diaries, the challenges of Mormon life in Florence and Genoa from 1857 to 1859. Henry J. Hudson was one of the most notable Mormon staybacks of Nance and Platte counties. He was a natural administrator and always highly thought of no matter which job he had, and he held several city and county jobs after moving to Columbus. Henry was born in 1822 in London. He married Sarah Shefford in London in 1844. Sometime during this time, he converted from Methodism to Mormonism, and they immigrated to the United States in 1851, and ultimately settling in Alton, Illinois. Henry left two diaries. There's one at the Genoa Museum in Nance County, and it dates from April 14th, 1857 to June 6th, 1858. And the diary held at Columbus dates from June 7th, 1858 to April 14th, 1859. These are a couple of the good pages. They're written in pencil and very hard to read. Genoa's diary was transcribed by Margaret Burke back in the 1960s and is available on the History of Nebraska website listed below there. And Columbus's diary was transcribed by Karen Griggs of BYU. And Karen recently has completed redoing both diaries where she filled in a lot of the gaps. The diaries tell of everyday life in Florence and Genoa. And today we'll focus on some of the challenges that Henry Hudson wrote about. This is a slide that I pulled off the History of Nebraska website. It shows a riverboat unloading in Florence in 1854. The Alton Company left St. Louis on April 14th, 1857 aboard the steamboat Hannibal. The company consisted of 200 saints, and Hudson was traveling with one of his sons. The mission of the Alton Company was to move from Florence to Genoa to establish a way station that'd be food and rest for the saints who would be traveling through later on. Basically, they'd be starting a farm to raise livestock and grow some crops to feed the people traveling through. The trip lasted 19 days. It was very cold. 2 children died on the trip. One infant died from the cold, and a 7-year-old boy died from the measles, and just about every adult came down with some sort of sickness. And since they were going to be starting a farm, it was kind of a true fish out of water situation. Henry wrote that very few Londoners have ever seen a blade of grass. They arrived in Florence on May 2nd. A house was found for the sick women and children, and the men slept outdoors in wagons or tents. And Hudson seemed to write about 3 major challenges. Their short time in Florence would be weather, sickness, and logistics. And by logistics, I mean that was gathering the necessary supplies to move from Florence out to Genoa. We'll start off with weather. Like I said, they landed on May 2nd. The next night, there was a heavy frost that made sleeping outdoors difficult, and the Alton Company purchased another tent. And then in true Nebraska fashion, 5 days later, a storm came up and nearly destroyed all of their tents. and then the cold and windy weather continued for about another week. And just about like another speaker mentioned this morning, maybe a tenth of the people, up to 1/3 of the people were sick. Hudson was also sick. He wrote that he was called upon to speak at a Sunday morning meeting on May 13th and had a difficult time. He said, "My body is weak and is a strange place in many strangers." About a week later, he was sicker yet, and he wrote that he had been trying to dig a place to put my house on. "It is a long time since I used a spade, and the ground is so full of roots that I am tired out completely." Finally, towards the end of May, he started to feel better, but then he mentioned that 2 other children in another family were down with smallpox. And logistics, due to rapidly increasing prices of provisions in Omaha, it was decided that some of the Alton Company would remain in Florence until they could obtain the means or cash to proceed to Genoa, which would be the spring of 1858. And this was a problem, I think, since day one, since 1847, that the people who had the means would be able to make the trip. Otherwise, the people with less money who could not buy the wagon and provisions had to stay behind. Upon leaving Genoa, upon arriving in Genoa, a top priority was to plant crops for the saints who would be traveling through in the future, and Brother Cunningham had a difficult time finding seed corn and potatoes, and he was recommending beans as a substitute. This slide is taken just west of Elk City, Nebraska, which is an important site on the trail, but anymore it's just a few houses and a bar. It's south of Highway 36, right on the edge of the hills where you would come down into the Alcorn Valley. You can see the Alcorn River down in the clearing, and this is fairly close to where the Mormon wagons would have came down out of the hills. Hudson wrote that on May 11th, 1857, the wagons began to move at 2 p.m. for Genoa, and all were gone by 4 p.m. Prior to this, several saints had second thoughts or were too sick and were released from their mission to Genoa. I know one fellow was homesick and went clear back to St. Louis. Hudson was asked by Brother Snow to remain in Florence to be an administrator for the Alton Company that was staying behind. Very few saints knew how to drive a team of oxen, Hudson included, and a man actually killed one of his ox just west of Florence, and Hudson blamed it on too much whiskey. This is the destination of Florence, be Genoa, Nebraska. This map was drawn in 1857. The shaded area is the proposed Pawnee Reservation, and you can see that Genoa lies just outside the reservation, and the Loup River runs right through the middle. Columbus is kind of right there on the east end, and then Monroe, and then Genoa. There was a little bit of confusion, I think, as to where the actual boundary of the Pawnee Reservation was supposed to be, because it stated that the treaty stated that the mouth of the Beaver Creek was the eastern boundary of the reservation, and that would put the boundary like way past Genoa there. And right now, Beaver Creek runs on the west side of Genoa and on the south side, and that's going to become a major problem in a couple years. Okay, yeah, you can see Beaver Creek is the boundary, right, kind of one of the boundaries right there. Let's see, by May 23rd, there was two-way traffic between Florence and Genoa. Letters from Genoa were encouraging, and Hudson collected letters to be taken back to Genoa. And this is the last entry by Hudson until September 6th, and I thought at this time he went back to St. Louis, collected his wife and kids, and then moved them up to Florence and then on out to Genoa. But during that time, Hudson did write a letter to one of the Mormon publications about the conditions in Genoa. He said that Genoa contained 400 acres, a public square on the high point in the middle of town. The crops were doing well. There was a sawmill and brickyard in operation, and the Alton Company field lies in a bend of the Beaver Creek, and that is right on the west end of the map right there. And today it is still a field. Each one of these fields is surrounded by a sod fence. I think they're about 4 feet tall. And the population of Genoa was 162. His first diary entry back on September 6th states that a meeting was held, and they voted to be organized as the Genoa branch of the LDS. Church officials were chosen. Albert was elected president. At Genoa, the main challenges were weather and farming and unity. Because of the tough living condition, keeping the members focused on their mission was difficult. And we'll start out with weather. It was dry at the end of October 1857, and Hudson wrote, "We narrowly escaped being burned up. The prairie caught fire from some ashes hot from the stove being carelessly thrown out. The next day was spent setting backfires and plowing around the lots to prevent future wildfires." Winter hit hard on a week later, first part of November, with heavy snow. Some of the buckwheat was not yet thrashed, and Hudson said it was a gloomy prospect for many of us. Quite a number continued to leave the settlement to winter below, and if all go that talk about it, we shall not have over 25 families to defend ourselves against the foes that may visit us. I do hope the temperature will moderate, for a number of the saints are without suitable houses to shelter them from the severity of the storm. And the intense cold continued through December. In the middle of December, planning for a party to be held in the new schoolhouse on January 1st. Many have not had bread or meat for weeks, and all saints will have the opportunity of partaking. And they did have the party on January 1st. It was attended by 95 saints. The next day, on the 2nd, was the party for the kids, and they were served toast and milk. Jumping forth to 1858, first part of February, some brothers returned after a 6-day hunt, and they only managed to kill one prairie chicken. A week later, some more heavy snow. Hudson's calf froze during the cold temperatures, and his wife was sick, and it didn't really help any because his house was full of snow. And then you know how it likes to warm up in February sometime, and could get up as high as 70 degrees. Anyway, all that snow started to melt, and those living in the dugouts had water running through their homes. Then moving forth to the planting and growing season of 1858, in the middle of June, the corn was yellowing from the cold temperatures. Much will have to be replanted. In the middle of July, they were having trouble with the cattle breaking down the sod fences and destroying the crops. The wheat crop was almost a total loss. A motion was made and carried to employ a cattle herdsman. Cattle were to be turned out at 7 a.m. and corralled by 6 p.m. Every loose oxen will be placed in the corral and released to the owner at a cost of 25 cents. Harvest season began in the middle of August. The remaining wheat was harvested, and the outlook was good for potatoes and buckwheat until they had an early frost around the 1st of September and damaged the buckwheat, but still the corn and sugarcane were doing well, except they didn't have enough processing equipment for the sugarcane. And then moving again forward to middle of March to middle of April 1859, heavy snow during that time, livestock suffering a lot from the cold and lack of hay. Moving on to member unity, it was always a meeting topic. There were many cases of fighting, pilfering, and charges of unchristian-like behavior. And this started out almost immediately in October 1857. Hudson wrote about one of their Thursday meetings. He never realized the power of darkness so manifest in a meeting of the kind since my connection with the church. Its effect was apparent on the countenance of all present. President Allen was called away to Florence in the middle of January 1858, and at a Sunday meeting, the members were urged to avoid every occasion of strife, for the adversary was seeking an opportunity to introduce division amongst us at a time when unity was most essential. March 21st evening meeting, much darkness prevailed that the saints speaking under much depression. At the close, the substitute president said that much of the meeting had been wasted by the saints not embracing their privileges, and that there was a feeling in the camp against him, and unless the saints repented, they would go to hell. President Allen finally returned on a day later. Then 4 days later, a log house under construction by Brother George Thomas was found level to the ground and logs scattered all over the lot. President Allen spoke on the incident. He said, "We came to build up the place, and the pulling down of Brother Thomas's home was not fulfilling that institution. If those who had done it wished to escape the consequences, he could recommend that they go and put up the house again, as good as they found it, and a little better would not hurt them." At the evening meeting the same day, some of the elders spoke on the disunity that had fostered during Brother Allen's absence and was ready to burst forth like a mighty volcano. Brother Allen continued, "There was pretty much of a mess among us. What else could we expect when his first counselor was not united with him?" On April 8, 1858, Brother Allen announces his release from the presidency of the Genoa mission, and Joel Johnson was elected as the new president at a June 6 vote. The new president was anxious to have the priesthood organized to remove the strife and bickering from the camp. The high priests and 70s were to meet together, and the elders were to be organized into a quorum. Moving forth again to January 1859, Hudson wrote that the leaders of the Genoa settlement are constantly being threatened for the discharge of our duties by the apostates of this place. A determination to prevent our building up is openly avowed by Brother Cotton and his adherents. We have been much annoyed with lying reports hatched up by the Cottonites, and today is posted upon the Liberty Pole a notice of a scandalous character against the president of this place. And one of the Cottonites appeared to be William Dykes, a member of the original Pioneer Company who went west with Brigham Young in 1847. Dykes was expelled from the Genoa Agricultural Association. Hudson wrote that he has forfeited his standing in the church by disobedience to the councils of the church and I thought he ought not be a member of the association. And the association was the group that they doled out all the lots and assigned the fields and did all the surveying of the area. January 23rd, Sunday meeting, there was much thieving going on in the camp. A penalty of 20 lashes was to be rigidly enforced. And things really went downhill at the end of January 1859. Brother Peck arrived from Florence with the news that Genoa lies within the boundaries of the Pawnee Reserve, and the Mormons will be paid for the land, but nothing else. A notice was sent to the Nebraska Territory delegate to Congress asking for a meeting about the reserve the next day. And 5 days later at the Sunday meeting, the president commented on the feelings of some of the brothers to run off to the gold mines. Such a spirit is from hell to get the saints scattered. We are sent here to gather, and when anything definite is known about the Indian Reserve, suitable counsel will be given. Despite the urging of the president to stick together, several families left for Florence and Council Bluffs. Hudson said that the apostates of this place are diligently circulating that the Indians will be here on the 1st of April and take possession of everything they can lay their hands on. This is winnowing out the chaff, for the timid and the fearful are going below to escape the apparent trials that await us. The next day at the Sunday meeting, Hudson and the president made some remarks to the saints to remind them to be true to the covenants of the priesthood, to stand faithful and true. And that same day they sent off another letter to the Indian Affairs Office concerning the Pawnee moving onto the reservation without compensation to the saints. On September 5th, 1859, Baptiste Bayhill, he was a famous half-breed Pawnee warrior. Frank Ditya was another half-breed, and a few other Pawnee men appeared during the meeting. And that's Baptiste Bayhill standing in the back, and a few of the then Pawnee scouts sitting in front of him. And it was not uncommon for Pawnee to come in and sit in at a meeting. But this time they seemed especially restless, and their demeanor caused so much commotion among the saints that the meeting had to be called off. A large group of people could be seen in the valley to the east of Genoa. Bayhill informed the president, it'd be the president of Genoa, that the Pawnee were coming to reclaim their land. The Indian agent James Gillis insisting that they settle on the eastern portion of the reservation on the east side of Beaver Creek, which would include the Genoa settlement. Frank Ditya, on the other hand, thought that the Pawnee would accept settling on the west side of the Beaver Creek and would be happy to have Genoa as a neighbor. Upon hearing this, the agent Gillis stopped the meetings and spent the next few days hoping to influence the Pawnee to settling on the extreme portion of the reservation. And during the period from September to November 1859, Agent Gillis caused distress among the saints by sending messengers into the Genoa settlement stating that he is having difficulty restraining the Indians from taking over Genoa. This caused panic among the settlers and a feeling of dominance among the Indians. Gillis offered to purchase the property and grain far below market prices, and he used this as leverage to prevent the Indians from turning their ponies loose in the fields. Because his opinion was one of cooperating with the Mormons, Frank Ditya was barred from the last council, and the chiefs were easily persuaded to annex the Mormon property. So also during this time, I think most of the Mormon settlers had moved out of the settlement of Genoa to western Platte County to a location known as Zigzag, which is right about there on the north side of the Loup River. Hudson wrote that it was called Zigzag because of the crooked streets of the settlement. And the Loup River also kind of makes an S-shaped turn right there, so that might have been the source of the name also. The area was also known as Keetskatoos, which is a Pawnee word for Platte, the Platte River. And they named that area Keetskatoos after Lester Platte, and his family had moved out in the 1840s and became some of the first teachers of the Pawnee. On November 20th, Hudson was called back to the village for a council with the Indians. Agent Gillis did not attend, but was represented by a reservation employee. During the meeting, a commotion began, and Hudson learned that a fire was spreading toward their new settlement. And by the time Hudson arrived, most of the houses and grain were lost. A later investigation revealed that the fire was started between the agent's house and the recently vacated Mormon fields, and conveniently blown their direction by a northwest wind. And that was the end of the large Mormon presence in the area. Some went west to Utah, others moved back east to Florence, Iowa, Kansas, or Missouri. The Hudson, Brindley, and McAllister families moved to Columbus about 1863. The Welch and Shackleton families moved to northeast Platte County, and William Dykes lived on a farm west of Columbus. And all the sources I can have looked at on William Dykes said that they say that he only died on November 27th in Nebraska. Well, he died in Columbus, and he is buried in Columbus Cemetery. And later, a few years later, Hudson had this to summed up his life in Genoa. I say it with much reluctance, how soon the religious zeal that prompted the half-starved, fainting soul to undertake their journey across the plains died out when they saw the chance to improve their condition and save 900 miles of weary travel and suffering. So the purpose of Brigham Young was circumvented, and hundreds remained all along the line of travel and started embryo settlements and cities. But the settlers of Genoa and other points endured untold hardships from lack of means and farming utensils. None may really know the privations many endured to hold body and soul together. Hudson, in 1860, Hudson was listed as a resident of Platte County near Genoa. His occupation was listed as a trader and ferryman. They operated the Genoa ferry under the Hudson, Welch, Freston and Company. In 1863, the Hudson family moved to Columbus, where he was elected Justice of the Peace. And between 1867 and 1887, he was elected Platte County Clerk, elected to the state legislature, elected Platte County Commissioner, appointed Postmaster, and elected Platte County Judge. In 1865, he was baptized as a member and ordained as an elder in the True Latter-day Saints, and that would be the early name for the Reorganized Latter-day Saints, which is now known as the Community of Christ. He was president of the Columbus branch and Central Nebraska District by 1866, and in 1870, he was ordained a high priest. Henry Hudson passed away on February 14th, 1903. And this was, in closing, this was written about him in the Columbus newspaper. He had every opportunity to become a man of wealth, and yet he never rose above what would be termed comfortable circumstances, for he never had ambition in the direction of riches. He was more than an ordinary man in many respects. In the early days, he acquired the confidence and respect of the settlers, and he so lived as to retain that confidence on to the end of his earth life. His best gifts were a splendid optimism, cheering personality, a generosity limited only by his purse, a hospitality which made his house a Mecca for those who needed a helping hand in a material or spiritual sense. Thank you.